Good Monday morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And I joked on Saturday when we broke live into video to do the Travaris Robinson news that was coming to UGA as co-defensive coordinator that I wanted to declare news bankruptcy because it was becoming difficult to keep up with everything. Well, that's even more true today because perhaps the T-Rob story taking a little bit of a surprising twist. We will tell you what we know about this as of press time, as they say, and then we'll be ear to the ground to follow this perhaps throughout the morning and throughout the day. So we'll do the best we can to give you the news as we have it. Georgia also got some good news in terms of a player returning for the 2024 season. We'll talk about that. And one way or another, it does seem like Will Muschamp likely to move into an off-field role at UGA, whether T-Rob actually comes or not. So all of that on the table. Jon Stinchcomb, we'll kind of get into the Kalen DeBoer hire for Alabama. We'll cover all of the bases. Glad to have you with us for it here on this holiday Monday. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I am pretty sure I started a show last week by saying never a dull moment, and I find myself needing to say the same thing again because it seems like we are in kind of an age of the college football calendar where we make a big announcement, we react to some news, and then we run the risk of 24 hours later, well, all of a sudden that news is not quite the way we thought that it was. That is literally how fast the news cycle is spinning right now, that things are seemingly happening at a rapid clip, and then some of those things eventually sort of reverse course and they end up not happening. We've had a lot of that in the transfer portal and the recruiting and everything else. It has been a wild time to try to be a college football fan and keep up with all of this. We're doing the best we can to obviously narrate this experience for you. And this is what I thought we were coming into to talk about here today. By the way, we'll give you a reminder that we are pre-recording this the morning of, so if news is breaking throughout the morning, obviously we're watching that closely here on DawgNation. But as of Saturday, I thought my Monday would be really kind of defined by coming in here and talking to you about Travaris Robinson, terrific defensive coach, most recently of Alabama, moving to Georgia as both a safeties coach and a co-defensive coordinator, replacing Will Muschamp, who had previously been in that role. More on Muschamp here in a moment. In fact, this wasn't just reportedly so or things that the internet chatter was suggesting was going to happen. Georgia did officially announce this. Let me show you this on the screen. Travaris Robinson kind of getting the nod from the official Georgia account here. The text saying, join us in welcoming the newest member of our staff, Travaris Robinson. Welcome to the Classic City. Hashtag at Coach T-Rob, go Dogs, with the hashtag. And you see the graphic there that does truly make that official as co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach. And perhaps that is what's going to happen here. Maybe that's the way all of this plays out. But there is speculation, and I believe it's now been, I think, from some of the Bama websites here, perhaps Bama Online, the On3 Bama site, I believe they've confirmed that since Georgia made this announcement on Saturday that T-Rob was coming here as co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach, I believe it's Bama Online that has had this first, that he has since interviewed at Alabama with new head coach Kalen DeBoer to perhaps stay there as like defensive coordinator all by himself, not a co-DC role, not sharing those responsibilities. I believe it's been reported that he's interviewing there and has interviewed there for the idea that he would have the defense by himself and the sole play caller for that defense in the first year of the Kalen DeBoer era there at Alabama. So that's kind of what this comes down to, which is on the heels of Nick Saban retiring, T-Rob looking around, good friends on the Georgia coaching staff, obviously a powerhouse program, a chance to kind of slide into the role that Will Muschamp had occupied. Clearly, Georgia's very attracted to him on that. But on the flip side of that, if you have a chance to have all the power for a defense, if you have the chance to kind of be the SEC-friendly face to a outsider coach, well, perhaps that would make the Alabama situation a little bit more attractive. So that's kind of where we sit very early on a Monday morning as we're recording the show. Georgia has announced T-Rob as its head coach, But if Alabama and new coach Kalen DeBoer were to truly offer him full and sole control of that defense, could this perhaps swing back the other way? I guess anything is possible. Now, keep in mind, a few of the Georgia assistants kind of have a similar story that when Georgia, brought over Trey Scott as defensive line coach, for instance, he had just been hired at Ole Miss, kind of took him away from there. So there's a lot of this stuff that kind of goes on where you think so-and-so is going to do one thing and ends up getting a better offer, and that's just kind of the crazy nature of college football. But it seems like a lot more of this kind of stuff is sort of happening lately where things are just really crazy all the time. Now, I can't really give you closure on this right now. You already know that T-Rob would be a good addition for Georgia. You understand why Kalen DeBoer, perhaps playing catch-up here, just having been hired, would do everything that he could to keep him. So the wrestling match of the quality coach, that kind of makes some sense. We all understand that. But in terms of how this is ultimately going to end, we don't really know. It's up in the air here right now. Here's all I can tell you, is that the best I can tell, Kirby Smart seems to be at peace with this sort of thing here right now. I want to go back the other day when Kirby Smart was on the radio station 92.9 The Game. Now, the question in a roundabout way is sort about, remember Jaden Maeva, the quarterback from UNLV, that for about 5 minutes was coming to Georgia, then changed his mind, decided to go to USC. And all of that was just sort of really weird. It kind of popped up out of nowhere. Then it sort of disappeared out of nowhere, and the whole thing was just really strange. Well, the context for that, doesn't it in some ways feel a little bit similar to the context for this, where out of nowhere, we didn't even know that Georgia had an opening for a co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach. For all we knew, that was still very much kind of locked away by Will Muschamp. But then on Saturday, it's announced that T-Rob was coming before we even really got the official confirmation that Muschamp was stepping down and stepping away. And now we're kind of left to wonder, well, is this all as real as it seems to be? Could Alabama work its way back in and pull T-Rob back to Tuscaloosa? In some respects, this sort of feels like how the Jaden Maeva thing sort of played out. And so with that as the context, here is the radio host from Atlanta, Steak Shapiro, asking Kirby Smart if he was disappointed. Now, he doesn't mention Maeva by name, but that's kind of the context of the question. Was he disappointed that Maeva moved on? And Kirby says something is in relationship to the transfer quarterback that I believe is also really relevant in this discussion here, too. Let me let you hear Kirby Smart on that.
Were you surprised or disappointed at all about how the quarterback room has filled out or not filled out since that decision at all?
No, not really surprised at all. Nothing surprises me anymore. It's go with the flow. It's who can adapt best. It's take the information you're given, take the opportunity to get players that you're given, and make the most of it. And that's what we've done.
So hopefully the context of what Kirby says about Maeva is obvious in this T-Rob situation. Kirby says, nothing surprises me anymore. And if that be true for a transfer quarterback changing his mind at the last minute, that might also need to be true for a defensive coach who you hire, officially announce, and then have that guy, go back to the original place that he was. Kirby says, nothing surprises me anymore. He also says, this is about going with the flow, which is not just a reference to one of our in-season shows where we make our picks, but also an understood phrase here of, listen, you just got to roll with the punches. You just got to be ready to do whatever and be nimble and be quick and just be ready to handle whatever comes. And the other word, and perhaps the most important word of all, is the idea of adapting, the ability to adapt to what college football throws at you at any given moment. I'm not going to lie to you, and you would all agree with me, I think, on this. The idea of there being any real significant order in college football, that's long since gone away. This is a sport that's sort of defined, especially in the offseason, by chaos. This is a very chaotic sport at the moment. And that chaos is not for everybody. Some people choose not to handle it. Some people just simply can't handle it. It's just too much. The constantly spinning news cycle and the ability or the requirement really to re-recruit your own players and re-recruit your own coaches and just keep everything in place, that's just too much for some people. But when you hear Kirby Smart reflecting there on the Maeva situation saying, you adapt, you roll with the punches, you do the best that you can, you would presume he would say the same thing about the Travaris Robinson situation there as well. T-Rob's a good coach. It's understandable why both Georgia and Alabama would want him, and we will see how all of this plays out. Now, let me shift gears to this just for a quick moment. One way or another, whether T-Rob sort of keeps the plan in place to come here to Georgia as a safeties coach and a co-defensive coordinator or not, he goes back to Alabama for more power and to give Kalen DeBoer the recognizable face down here in SEC country that he desperately needs. One way or another, it does seem like Will Muschamp is stepping away from the role that he's been in. Will no longer be Georgia's co-defensive coordinator, will no longer be Georgia's safeties coach, and will be instead in kind of an analyst role here, still around the program, but not on a daily basis as an on-field coach. Now, as we said on Saturday when this news about T-Rob first broke, that if you've got Will Muschamp and his institutional knowledge still connected to the program, while also someone who's as respected as Travaris Robinson working as a co-defensive coordinator to safeties coach, that's the best of all worlds. You would obviously love that. But one way or another, keeping Will Muschamp involved in this program, if it is true that he is ready to step away from an active coaching role, the fact that Muschamp will be sticking around here, I think that's a very valuable thing. And I want to go back to SEC Media Days from a couple of summers ago when Kirby Smart at that time kind of talked about what he sees the value of Will Muschamp being. And so in light of the fact that Muschamp is stepping away from an on-field coaching role but staying with the program, Kirby's description of Muschamp's value from a couple of summers ago, this is incredibly relevant. This is what Kirby Smart said at the time.
Will's been a tremendous asset for me as a head coach because you value people who have been in your seat. So Todd Munkin's been a head coach. You know, Matt Luke was that way for us as well. He'd been a head coach. Mel Tucker had been in a lot of roles before he left us. So I value that experience he's had and understanding the do's and don'ts, things, ways to do things, how to practice, how you run your organization, and also it gives you ability to delegate too. You got to take some things off your hand. I can focus my attention in other areas if I know he's in charge of something because he's done it, and he's been unbelievable. He's a great staff guy. He's super positive with our players. Players enjoy and love being around Coach Muschamp, and I'm just very thankful that he and his family are on our staff and with our program.
You want that guy around the program if you can get him. The description that Kirby Smart gives there is obviously very accurate, and to keep that institutional knowledge in place I think is a truly valuable thing. But let me also say one more point as well. The other day I was looking at Brett McMurphy. Do you know who that is? National college football writer. He works for the Action Network now, and he was talking about what he thought was one of his favorite Nick Saban stories. And this is not me taking a shot at Nick Saban. This is just a reaction that I had to a story where McMurphy's recounting this thing on Christmas Day many, many years ago, going back to the time in which Kirby Smart still worked as Nick Saban's defensive coordinator. And Nick Saban was not happy about being at his in-laws' house on Christmas, and so therefore he concocted this scheme to get Kirby on the phone, and he pretends that Kirby's trying to drag him into the coaching office, and Nick Saban basically goes to work on Christmas Day and then convinces all of his other coaches to come into the office there as well on Christmas Day many years ago. And when Brett McMurphy tells the story, it's told from the standpoint of, oh, this is how tireless of a worker Nick Saban is. But, you know, and he concocted this scheme to get away from his in-laws. But I'm sitting here thinking, I'm not trying to be too judgmental, but like, okay, well, you got away from your in-laws, but you also left your kids on Christmas. Like, that's sort of weird. And you know, I don't know. Like obviously the only context I have for that story is what Brett McMurphy tells, but I can tell you this from having, you know, known people who know people who know people who know people, is that, you know, family is very important to Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart is a family man in addition to being a coach, and Kirby, I believe, you know, operates a program in which the Georgia coaches also were able to value family as well. And I think that Will Muschamp stepping away is, if I had to guess, as much about family as anything. We all saw the great video of him from the Orange Bowl where, you know, he's celebrating, you know, his son Jackson Muschamp being in the game and getting a first down. I think many of you are aware that his other son, Whit Muschamp, who I've been led to believe Will Muschamp was traveling to watch play high school football in Chattanooga, you know, pretty frequently this past season. He's on his way to Vanderbilt here right now. And so Muschamp, after being a head coach a couple of different places, is now sort of stepping away to be a little bit more of a father on a full-time basis. In fact, spending more time with family was the reason given for Muschamp stepping into the role that he's stepping into. Now, sometimes that's code language for just got fired or whatever, but obviously in Will Muschamp's case, that's clearly not what this is. He really is stepping into more of a family role, which I think is great. I think it's great that the Georgia coaches do value family. I want them to. Listen, if you're a Georgia football coach, all of us who are fans of UGA, we expect you to work hard because that's what the SEC requires. But none of us, I think, want you to, not be fully present for your families and fully present for your kids and experience the situations they're going through on a regular basis. So Witt, as he begins his career at Vanderbilt, Jackson, as he continues to go through his, time at UGA and whatever's next for him, or just anything else that Muschamp may have, from a family basis there. The fact that he's taking some time, earned the right to, and now taking some time to enjoy that, I have to say, I think that's a really good thing, and I wish him well as he does that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Obviously, it's a holiday Monday. We look back on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, and as you're doing that today with your family and friends, we appreciate you allowing DawgNation Daily to be a part of your day. Whether it's on video, of course, 10 a.m. across all platforms, normally live, pre-recorded for right now, but back again very soon. Really a fun new horizon in store for DawgNation Daily in the weeks and months to come. Can't tell you all about that now because I don't know all about it, but there is obviously a lot of fun stuff on the way here. So we appreciate you kind of riding through what has been a little bit of a bumpy period, but man, big fun things in store in the months to come. So 10 a.m., the live spot for our program on video, coming again very soon. Of course, recorded the day of here right now. You get the drill on all of that. 9:45 still there for our first and 15 at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. We're always truly appreciative of all that. Normally it's radio, Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, and podcasts across all the platforms. Just really thankful that you found a platform that works for you and you choose to be a part of our show. And incredibly thankful to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make the show possible. It's a really cold week coming up. Windy, cold weather, perhaps some snow. Do I hear this correctly? There could be snow in the forecast here right now, so there's a lot going on there with all of that. Well, guess what? When all that cold, windy weather is taking place, you want it outside your home. You don't want it coming inside the house, and that's what really quality, properly sealed and efficient windows, the likes of which that Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. Their quality windows and doors keep the outside where it's supposed to be. They keep you feeling cozy and warm on the inside the way that you want to. Plus, the home looks better. It's always great to have good curb appeal. Great to be a good neighbor, great to perhaps positively benefit your resale factor if that's something you're thinking about coming up in the year to come. So Pella Window and Door of Georgia, a really valuable asset for you, the best way to take the best care of your home. And you've been hearing me say that now for years. I think the next step for you is to have a conversation with one of those Pella experts and to find out just how true this really is. So you can stop by and see them in their Experience Center in Duluth, put your hands on the product, feel what makes it different, or have them come out and visit you. They'll give you a no-pressure consultation right there in your home. You can do it virtually if you'd prefer to do that, of course, too. Or you can just give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Plus, you can visit them on the web, pellaofga.com/DawgNation. That's pellaofga.com/DawgNation. Reach out to them. Tell them the BA from DawgNation Daily said that they would take good care of you, because I know they will. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is truly viewed to be the best. All right, here coming up in a couple of moments, we're going to get a chance to talk to Jon Stinchcomb. Fun discussion coming up with him about what we do and don't know about Travaris Robinson and whether he's going or staying as a newly hired Georgia football coach. We'll get into the legacy of Nick Saban, the new hire of Kalen DeBoer, more on the DeBoer thing also later on in the program as well as it relates to UGA in particular. We'll do some of that here coming up in a moment. But prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse. And around the doghouse today, I want to focus on some good news for UGA that perhaps flies under the radar here just a little bit. It was announced this weekend that Warren Brinson, Georgia defensive lineman, is returning for 2024. He put this out on Instagram saying, #I'm back. Sorry for the wait. So Warren Brinson is coming back for 2024. Good ad for Georgia to go along with Nazir Stackhouse, who earlier had also made the same announcement. So Georgia gets a couple of veteran pieces on its defensive line. You pair this with some veteran offensive linemen who are also coming back, Xavier Truss and Tate Ratledge, and you see Georgia holding on to, from within its own ranks, the type of line of scrimmage talent that you cannot easily go out and replicate other places. If you look at the transfer portal is a good way to supplement your roster, especially at some positions, but it is not a place, and it is not going to be a particularly effective tool to build or rebuild either line of scrimmage. There just aren't great offensive linemen in the transfer portal. We've got a multi-year track record of proving that. And if you really want to fill out a defensive line, not an easy thing to do either. Now, there are occasionally going to be the LT Overtons and the Warren Nolans, Walter Nolan, excuse me. There are some of those guys that are out there. We've obviously talked about them a little bit here this season, but that's a little bit of an outlier compared to what you typically are going to find. Because when programs get those really good line of scrimmage players, they're going to do everything they can to hold on to them. And then obviously eventually those players are going to move on to the NFL. So when Georgia works as hard as it does in high school football recruiting to bring in players like this, clearly there's additional value there, because in terms of going to replace them, if you wanted to try to do that in the portal, you just wouldn't be able to do it. And on the open market, a guy like Brinson, you would assume would have a ton of value, the same way a Stackhouse would, the same way the Truss and Ratledges of the world would. Georgia holding on to a player like this, having him choose to forego the NFL for one more year to come back to UGA, is clearly a very big deal. And it also is a part of the conversation we've had ongoing here now for a couple of days, which is that in light of Georgia sort of unanimously and consensusly, is that a word, consensusly? The consensus is, let me say it that way, preseason number one team for 2024, what we've been asking is, okay, well, what stands in the way of that? If everybody sort of seems to think this is true here right now, what would perhaps prevent that from being true for the upcoming year? We've talked about the schedule that Georgia might play. We've talked about the need to replace Brock Bowers, how difficult that is. And the sort of third of those issues, the other thing that I have sort of seen as a potential, issue for Georgia to deal with is the need to create a defensive line in 2024 that resembles a little bit more of what Georgia certainly had in 2021, if not also what it had in 2022. And a guy like Brinson coming back is a big part of that. And yet, in addition to that, Georgia's got to build some guys around the Brinsons and around the Stackhouses. Georgia's got to just show a little bit more teeth with that aspect of the defense. You go back and look at the stats from a year ago. Georgia was just 9th in the SEC in sacks last season at 30 sacks on the year. Just 10th in the SEC in tackles for loss with 72 on the year. So while it's great that Warren Brinson's coming back, certainly Georgia's made better because of it. He is a part of an ongoing story for UGA of a defensive line that needs to improve, needs to play better, and you better believe that's going to be one of the conversations we have here a lot on DawgNation Daily, exactly how Georgia gets that done. For now, though, we'll call that Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. I'll also say this real quick before we bring on Jon Stinchcomb. I'm proud to make a really fun announcement that if you go to DawgNation.com tomorrow, one of the things you're going to see is a really cool giveaway from our friends at Kroger. I'm previewing this for you now. It's going to be live and taking place tomorrow, where you have a chance to win a trip on the DawgNation cruise coming up in April, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. There are more details to come about this tomorrow, but I want you to be locked in. I want you to see this, the DawgNation cruise giveaway. We did this last year. We had a great time. Kroger said we had so much fun doing this last year. We want to do this again here this year. So someone's going to win a chance to be a part of our DawgNation cruise in April. It's going to be super, super simple, super easy to register for your chance to win. All of that going to be at DawgNation.com tomorrow. So please make sure you're watching the website closely. It'll be really easy to see, and a chance for you to join us on the DawgNation cruise, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Can't wait to tell you more about that. Details on that debuting at DawgNation.com tomorrow. So make sure you're there and ready to go on that. But for us, we are ready to go with Jon Stinchcomb, the former UGA All-American, on Brinson's return, on what's next for Georgia as it relates to Travaris Robinson. Sort of a shrug on that right now, although admittedly easy to imagine that if Robinson gets the money, the power that he wants at Alabama, he may rethink his decision to come to UGA. We're covering all of that with Jon Stinchcomb here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Always a fun time to have Jon Stinchcomb in the program, talking about all the stuff going on with Georgia football, and there's stuff going on seemingly each and every day. John, before we get into some of the latest on the Travaris Robinson stuff and kind of what might be happening there, how about Warren Brinson's decision to return to Georgia in 2024? This to me is one of those stories that perhaps flies under the radar a little bit because, A, I think that people had sort of assumed that Brinson was going to come back. Now he makes it official. But the other part of this is that I don't believe there's proper consideration sometimes given for how few of these kinds of players there are, for instance, in the transfer portal. The idea of, well, I'll go out and just get a ready-made, ready-to-play defensive lineman. Honestly, when it comes to line of scrimmage guys, there just aren't a lot of those in the portal. So when you have Tate Ratledge, Xavier Truss come back, those are the kinds of players that you couldn't go out and easily replace somewhere else. When it's a Nazir Stackhouse and now a Warren Brinson on the defensive line. Once again, the example of the kind of thing of if you've got guys like that who you do trust to play that you can keep, so much better to do that than have to go out and try to replace them. I believe the Brinson decision to return is a very underrated positive story for UGA. What do you make of it?
Couldn't agree more. I think with Brinson and Tate Ratledge, not only are you talking about high-level players that have been a part of this team and been a major factor in the success that Georgia has had, but you talk about locker room identity builders. You talk about a couple guys, and they're not alone. Xavier Truss, throw him into the bag as well as Carson Beck and other guys that have chosen to return over other options that they might have had. And it builds a stronger locker room. You talk about identity. You talk about the way things are done the Georgia way. These are guys that have bought in and led the way for a while now. And with Warren Brinson, in my opinion, he's been one of our most effective interior pass rushers for the past couple of years now. So, not probably on the level of some of those bigger name guys. Jalen Carter comes to mind, but he certainly affects an offensive line. He gets a lot of penetration, tackles for losses, affecting the quarterback, moving him off his spot. He's been one of our most effective interior rushers.
Now, that said, the other day, John, when we were noticing some of those way too early top 25s that are coming out, you know how much I love that kind of stuff, fun speculation as early as possible about the upcoming season. We're seeing Georgia number 1 in those polls. And so I've been kind of talking about all of this from the standpoint of, okay, well, what sort of stands in the way of Georgia perhaps, succeeding in all of that? What sort of stands in the way of Georgia perhaps really, fulfilling that potential and being the number 1 team in the country for next year? And to me, one of the major issues is the need to have better success along the defensive line. I think it's great that Brinson's coming back because his experience aids in that mission. But I do believe that one of the things that was kind of missing from Georgia here this year was that elite, dominant defensive line. And as you look ahead to next season, Brinson, Stackhouse, newcomers in larger roles, just being better along the defensive line, I do believe, is one of the most important kind of, obstacles in the way of the Dogs for 2024. Do you agree with that?
Yes. You look at our last and lone loss from the past 2 seasons, and it came at the hands of our defensive line getting bounced around more than what we're accustomed to. And we made Alabama's offensive line look superior, or they were. But you watch that game and go, they were able in some pretty critical situations to kind of enforce their will against our defensive front, specifically late in the game where we knew we needed the ball back. And those were designed Jalen Milroe runs, and we couldn't do much about it. Now, that's just a snapshot, right? We're not basing this assessment off solely a few plays in one game. There were times where, I felt like our defensive unit together was superior to most. But we're talking about the scales in which we're measuring our team is against the best of the best. And I do agree that certainly wasn't it's an area that we can improve, to be kind. It's an area that, in years past, we have seen what superior elite play from a group like that looks like. And it's let's also recognize we're not always going to have Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Walker and, a group that puts in first-round draft picks at will. But I think we're pretty close. I think we've got some pieces in place that we're adding, some young guys that, maybe we're talking about 3 years from now in that same vein.
I said this before you joined our show, which is that I came in assuming that on a Monday we'd be talking about, hey, Georgia made pretty shrewd coaching hire. We didn't know that Will Muschamp wanted to step away from his co-DC safeties coach role at Georgia, but if he does, boy, great to keep him on the staff in an analyst role. You love that. Great to bring in a guy like Travaris Robinson, who's thought to be, such a high-value assistant coach in the SEC. Seems like a grand slam home run hire for UGA, and yet we're kind of in that day and age in which it seems like in college football nothing's ever fully done or fully final, and there are rumblings and grumblings as you and I are recording this early on a Monday morning, holiday morning, by the way. Thank you for your time, John. But as you and I are recording this early on a Monday morning, that Alabama, perhaps with new coach Kalen DeBoer, has made the offer to Robinson to now stay at Alabama in a full-fledged defensive coordinator role, kind of having those responsibilities to himself. More power, perhaps more money. Hard thing to turn down if it is true. So, John, we're kind of sitting here in a limbo right now of, well, if Georgia's able to have T-Rob, and by the way, they've announced him on the coaching staff, if they're able to have him, then that's great, but also understandable why a brand-new coach at Alabama who does not have ties to the SEC would do everything in his power to keep a coach like this in the program who does have such deep ties to the SEC. These are the sort of wrestling matches that are becoming commonplace this day and age, are they not?
Well, and I think it shows the value that he brings to a staff. Not only in his ability to coach, he's viewed as one of the brighter minds when it comes to that position group, and just overall schematically, they were certainly singing his praises in Alabama in recent times. So there is not only that aspect of what he brings to the table, but his ability to recruit and connect with the highest level players across the country. He's seen as one of the best recruiters. So obviously a coveted member of anyone's staff, and I think Georgia fans and the Georgia coaching staff was pretty excited to hear that what that coaching staff might look like with him in the room and still able to keep Muschamp in that analyst role. That certainly makes sense to me. As you're looking at it, you're going, man, I could help with scheme. I could talk about how we can best utilize our guys and get them in not only the best position, but continue to train them in that aspect as Coach Muschamp could do in an analyst role. But he probably doesn't have that same demand that you would as a named coach in the recruiting world, and trying to make sure that everybody is, not only the high schoolers, but the college kids as well, are happy and wanting to stay a part of that program. That's got to be draining in that position. So if it is, in fact, the ink is dried and final, and Georgia is able to keep Coach Robinson, I think that's a big hire. And I certainly would understand why an incoming coach that isn't quite as familiar with the SEC would want to retain him.
Looking back on what happened on Saturday, I'm a baseball fan, John, and when a pinch hitter is announced, he's in the game. You've now burned that player. When a relief pitcher is announced, that's the moment in which, when the PA announcer says his name, that means that guy is now officially in the game. And if you take him out then you've kind of, you've sort of burned him, as a player. Sort of looking back on this, Georgia seemingly rushing to get the official announcement out, basically as, Kalen DeBoer is still getting off the plane and sort of figuring out where the bathrooms are at the Alabama football office. Georgia's making this announcement as a way of, kind of acting quicker than Alabama could respond. And, now that's kind of put the Crimson Tide in a situation where they're trying to play catch-up, DeBoer himself trying to play catch-up. But when you see Georgia moving so fast, I don't think we even knew that there was a need for a safeties coach and a co-defensive coordinator to Georgia. For all we knew, that was still going to be a role that Muschamp was in. But when you see Georgia act as quickly as it does, get the announcement out as quick as it did, that seemed like Georgia's attempt, I guess, to sort of make this happen before Alabama could respond. But obviously, if the offer that you make is big enough, both in terms of responsibility and money, perhaps that wins out, even though Georgia's already kind of announced you as on their staff.
Yeah, maybe so. I certainly think that the wheels turn pretty quickly in this world, especially as you're looking at opportunities. As a matter of fact, when I first heard that Coach Saban was retiring, I thought it would be more of a possibility that we would face attrition in the coaching staff with as many connections as our staff has with Alabama, and recognizing two things. One, we've got a really good staff. I mean, really highly talented across the board staff. And two, Alabama is one of the places that would be coveted as a coach. There's a lot of schools out there and programs where you're going, I don't know if I would take a position, even if it was brought more money or a better title, because what Georgia's got going is really enticing to be a part of. Alabama is one of the few exceptions where you go, that might make sense for some of our staff to see if the grass is actually greener, and there was more opportunity there. So I was actually pretty surprised that this transition has provided opportunity for Georgia. So, obviously not all the cards have been dealt onto the table, but, these things do move quickly. And when you're trying to put together a staff or, manage your staff, anytime you get an opportunity to add some really high-level coaches, I think everyone's covetous of those.
And the time we have left, you mentioned this a moment ago, how about the decision from Nick Saban to retire, and now Kalen DeBoer announces a head coach? I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on both those things, both in terms of the legacy that Nick Saban leaves behind. I think all of us would acknowledge that he's been the greatest college football coach we've ever seen, and obviously, tremendous shoes to fill for a guy like Kalen DeBoer. What do you make of the transition taking place in Tuscaloosa right now?
Yeah, well, let's look in isolation first at Nick Saban's retirement, and can easily and justifiably and should be recognized as, the best coach to come through college football during his era. And, what he was able to do at Alabama was impressive and something that is a standard setter. And I'm hopeful that Coach Smart and Georgia will exceed that in years to come. I think there's some significant possibilities that can occur. So I'm excited about that. And, I have a great deal of respect. It was like Coach Spurrier during our era that you recognize him as a great coach. And, as a Georgia fan, you didn't actually like it. I wasn't a super big fan of Florida during those years. As a matter of fact, it made for some rivalry moments that I think will stick with all of us for a while. But you can respect the fact that he is so effective and was able to do it for such a long time, and that's hard to do. One of the hardest things to do is climb the mountain. It might be even harder and is harder to stay at the top of it. And to see what he was able to do is impressive. Now, the quick response that I think Alabama had and their ability to go out and find one of the hottest names in college football, I think is almost expected. It's a little strange that it comes from outside the ranks of the SEC, but when you talk about a guy who's been able to build a program when he doesn't have all the pieces, and think about the proposition of what he could do when he does, when there are the assets that Alabama has in place, and he can build a program. It's one of those moves where no one's going to be able to walk in and replace a Nick Saban easily. But I do think the DeBoer hire is a strong one.
Jon, really interesting thoughts. We certainly appreciate your time here today, and hope you enjoy some time with your family, of course, as always. And listen, there's news breaking all the time. The news we think is breaking then takes a flip-flop and goes back the other direction. There are plot twists all over the place. So no doubt plenty of stuff for you and I to talk about in the weeks and months to come. So we'll enjoy doing that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Always enjoy it, BA. Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really good stuff from Jon Stinchcomb there. Great to have him as a part of the program. And here on a holiday Monday, even better to kind of go through a lot of the news that's out there right now. And by the way, speaking of news that's out there, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I'll remind some of you that next week is a big week for me. It's my chance to be among the very first people to be on board Icon of the Seas, the brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship, largest cruise ship ever constructed. So excited about doing that. We've got some pre-recorded shows we'll be airing next week to give me a chance to step away. So I appreciate you doing that and appreciate your continued support of us while I take a little time to enjoy that and come back and report to all of you about exactly what Icon of the Seas is going to be about. It's an exciting year for Royal Caribbean. The debut of Icon of the Seas is a big part of that. I can't wait to experience all of that. In fact, I'm going to try to, if they'll let me, shoot some video on the ship that I'll come back and I'll show to all of you. I think you're just going to be blown away by everything that it has in store, and hopefully that gets you excited about being a part of our DawgNation cruise in April of 2024 there as well, because speaking of large cruise ships, we're going to be on Allure of the Seas, one of those Oasis-class ships, and it's going to be an incredible time. There is still time for you to join here, too, as we head towards April of 2024. You can give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147, or email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com. And you can also check out royaldogs.com, DAWGS, of course, is how you spell that, royaldogs.com. All the information about the DawgNation cruise, leaving out of Port Canaveral, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, wide array of specially themed DawgNation events. It's all on board for you there. RoyalDogs.com, the website to go to find out more about that. All right, let's dive deeper into the Kalen DeBoer situation here for a moment. And I would say that just at the sort of baseline level, this represents a good hire for Alabama. DeBoer is one of the most consistent winners we've seen step into a college football landscape in really quite some time. I personally do not believe it is as good a hire as Dan Lanning could have been, but, fair to point out, DeBoer did beat Lanning a couple of times on the field here this year, so clearly DeBoer is doing plenty of winning to make him sort of worth and this level of job. I just think that Lanning would have been a better fit here because Lanning knows the SEC, having coached at Georgia, having been a former staffer at Alabama. There's a little bit more of a geographic tie that I would believe would have made Lanning valuable, but right now he's got an opportunity at Oregon that he, seemingly did not want to step away from. But Kalen DeBoer was the hire. You cannot dispute DeBoer's status, rising the ranks from like NIA coach up the ladder to eventually getting the Washington job, winning at a really unprecedented clip based on where Washington had been for quite some time. You can't dispute the resume that put him in line for the Alabama job. This clearly, from a resume standpoint, represents a strong hire for Alabama. But the caveat to that is this, is that the only coach that Alabama would have ever hired was the kind of coach that had a resume like this. In other words, you have to be as successful as DeBoer was to get on Alabama's radar. Alabama was never going to hire anyone who didn't have the sort of radar, that, or I should say the sort of resume that put them on that radar, that this is the way this all goes. So from that standpoint, it's still not obvious how this ends for DeBoer at Alabama, because if he didn't have the kind of resume he currently has, he wouldn't be a candidate for the job. But beyond that, will he be successful in Tuscaloosa? Will he be successful at Alabama? Honestly, none of us can know, and it almost seems like it's sort of a coin flip, right? I mean, you have examples of guys like Brian Harsin who come to Auburn and from outside the SEC completely overwhelmed by the entire thing, a poor fit from the word go, and seemingly sort of dead on arrival. On the flip side of that, you have a guy like Urban Meyer who had very little ties to the South when he came here to Florida, back in the, turn of the century almost. And yet Urban Meyer did have an unprecedented level of success there at Florida, won a couple of national championships, and really made the Gators a fixture on the national scene after a little bit of a dip post Steve Spurrier. So you've kind of got examples of sometimes this really works out in the case of Urban Meyer. Sometimes the outsider, such as Brian Harsin, is totally trampled by the SEC. In terms of how Kalen DeBoer is going to operate here, we simply don't know. I know many of you saw what Steve Spurrier said the other day. Our buddy Mike Griffith wrote about this, but he didn't think that DeBoer would last much more than 3 years. But the honest truth is, that's not perhaps as bold a statement as you think that it is. I mean, the SEC is a little bit of a short-term proposition for a lot of people. I mean, it takes great success to stay employed for a long period of time, and if you don't have that great success, then you're not going to last. So we have one of two things that are about to happen. Either DeBoer is going to win very quickly and become one of the most respected coaches in all of college football, or he probably will flame out just as fast, because that's the pace that these sort of things seem to move at. It is obviously interesting that they have focused on the offensive side of the ball. Ryan Grubb, who was really a candidate to get the Alabama offensive coordinator job a year ago, interestingly enough, is going to now be that OC now. I do think this is interesting to see what this means for, like, say, Jalen Milroe moving forward. Obviously, had DeBoer stayed at Washington, it seems like Will Rogers, the former Mississippi State quarterback, was going to be the quarterback there. Are they happy and are they settled on Milroe? Would they perhaps consider a different quarterback? I know that may seem unimaginable just considering in the eyes of some. Milroe's kind of a Heisman Trophy candidate for next year, but the truth is that Milroe is pretty limited as a thrower, and DeBoer and Grubb clearly want a high-level offense, the likes of what they had with Michael Penix this past year in Seattle, and I don't know that Jalen Milroe is capable of providing that, and given the pressure that DeBoer will have to build a successful program quickly, making a tough evaluation of his quarterback will be one of the things that they do. Now, maybe Milroe is their guy, but I do believe that's perhaps the next sort of thought about this on that side of the ball. It'll obviously be fascinating. And of course, the first game for DeBoer in the SEC is in Tuscaloosa against Georgia. Certainly a huge spotlight there on that. There was sort of a pressure-packed game for Georgia anyway because it was going to be a chance for Kirby Smart to get a win against Nick Saban, what's really the first kind of normal circumstances regular season game the two coaches would have ever coached against each other. And now it's going to be more about the idea of Kirby as the established coach and the established program with a big head start over DeBoer, Alabama, making sure they keep that distance in place here. And if Georgia is able to get that win, then I do believe it's going to sort of signify to a lot of people a true sea change in the SEC, where the unquestioned supreme power in this league is Kirby Smart and the program that Kirby Smart leads, the Georgia Bulldogs. That will be certainly a fascinating thing to go down there. September 28th of next year, DeBoer's first SEC game against the Georgia Bulldogs, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, let me take a moment here before we wrap up today's show just to mention this. In Athens on Saturday for the Georgia basketball game, I had a great time. Obviously, it seemed for good portions of that game in the second half that Georgia was going to win, and then sort of slipped away there at the end. Tennessee, to its credit, a lot of length, challenging a lot of shots at the front of the rim. Obviously, they kind of get in Georgia's face a lot there in the second half. Georgia has a pretty long drought there. But Tennessee, a good basketball team, and a lot to like about the Vols if you start thinking about the NCAA tournament. Georgia, to its credit, though, does keep pace for most of that game, seemingly with a lot more wins still to come here this season. I like the tweet from Josh Brooks after the weekend saying that we had made a commitment to make the Stegman Coliseum a tough place to play for our opponents. And although we couldn't come up with a W against Tennessee today, the atmosphere was what we envisioned. Thank you to everyone in the Steg today, especially the students. So I do believe that Josh Brooks' statement there is probably an accurate one, which is that Georgia basketball sort of seemed like a thing to me again on Saturday. We're a football show. That's what our audience wants to hear. But I do like Georgia basketball. I like college basketball, and I was very excited to be back a part of a fun college basketball atmosphere this past Saturday. I think there are some bright days ahead there for Mike White. This is a team that's a lot of fun to watch, and while not able to get it done in what really was a great opportunity to win against Tennessee, we think there's some fun days ahead before this season's done. So we'll continue to keep our eye on Georgia basketball, although admittedly they do come up a little bit short against the Vols here this past weekend. And as we wrap up, we'll do so with the Golden Shoe. Our buddy Joel Kelly, who's always such a talented graphic artist, he sends this to us here. How about Kalen DeBoer? Indeed, very big shoes for him to fill moving forward into his Alabama career. Joel, very accurate with all of that there, and we'll see how DeBoer goes about filling those shoes there as the Alabama coach, with seemingly Nick Saban looking over his shoulder every step of the way. Kind of an interesting dynamic there, but very good stuff from Joel Kelly as DeBoer tries to fill the shoes left behind by Nick Saban. Strong stuff from Joel. We'll give him a golden shoe there for that. And as far as the lousy, stinking Gators are concerned, speaking of coaches who come in quick and flame out fast, that may be Billy Napier's story. It's been 1,164 days since the Florida Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That's why they're the lousy, stinking Gators, and that's going to keep on going up and up and up and up. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. It's funny around the old studio here. We've tried like 8,000 ways to make sure we're able to deliver these live comments to you. And by the way, we've got a lot of people working here on a holiday, so I certainly appreciate everybody who's helped us kind of get this up and running today, because we do think it's important to be here on a day like this. Now, I'd love to say I got to be here because I got to tell these Georgia fans what's going on. The truth is, I'm not sure I know what's going on, but clearly there is a wild scene out there. As you're aware, we started the show by saying this. Georgia made like an aggressive move on Saturday, announcing Travaris Robinson as the new safeties coach and co-defensive coordinator. Will Muschamp, the emeritus figure, now moving into the off-field role as an analyst. And then lo and behold, there were like text messages and things like that coming in yesterday of, oh, did you hear, maybe so-and-so's thinking about staying in Alabama? And I didn't really take that too seriously at the time. And then this morning, I wake up very early to do the show. Obviously, right now, we're pre-recording it, so you wake up even earlier than that. And then you're left to believe, all right, well, I guess this is going to be a thing today, which means that we're going to have no idea what's out there. Online chatter the last few minutes seems like it's pretty good for Georgia. I do believe that T-Rob is a coach that you want. I always caution Georgia fans. Georgia fans get very impatient very fast. There's a lot of this with recruits and everything else of, well, he just needs to make up his mind, and if he don't want to be here, we don't want him. I would say for a coach the quality of T-Rob, that's not the case. That, of course, you want him. And if you're Alabama, of course, you would do anything you could do to keep him. By the way, that's even after he's been announced as a Georgia coach. Because, listen, Georgia announcing him on Saturday was part of the strategy. You get him announced, you get the graphic out, and perhaps it just gets a little bit easier to sort of keep everything in place after that. But all of this was Georgia leaning on its institutional strength, the fact that its coaching staff in place, the fact they're moving several steps ahead of Alabama right now. All of this was trying to strike quickly before DeBoer had a chance to sort of feel his way around in the dark and figure out what he wanted to do on the defensive side of the ball. And by the way, rookie coaches sometimes make mistakes. And DeBoer, as a rookie coach in the SEC, this may prove to be a mistake. That he acted quickly to hire his offensive guys like Ryan Grubb, who mostly were coming from Seattle with him, when perhaps knowing that was already a bird in hand, he should have acted more quickly on the defensive side. Fill that side out first with the sort of SEC-friendly names that people down here in the South expect to see, and then go back and get your Ryan Grubbs and people like that. Could be that when it's all said and done, if T-Rob does stick with Georgia, you'll look back on the DeBoer part of this and say, maybe he hired his coaches in the wrong order, but we will see. From Lang to Stank says that BA's got the championship aura around him. I certainly appreciate that. Thank you very much. Beer Cans and Batty says, I just turned into a Super Saiyan. I'm not really quite so sure what that is, but I am happy to be with you here right now. Jerry Dogfan says that Bama treated Saban the right way. FSU did Bobby Bowden dirty. A little bit of an interesting comparison to how two all-time greats sort of stepped down from their jobs. Jay Shop's wondering, do I have a glow around me? Maybe what y'all just don't realize is this is the kind of angelic figure I am. See, some of y'all think of me as, whatever, but maybe the little glow around me is just sort of a representation of just the fact that, listen, I'm angelic. Y'all just don't realize that. That could be the case. Frank Patterson wondering if maybe KJ Bolden really did break the Buford curse, considering the fact that Georgia, brings in Jake Pope. We haven't even had a chance to get into the Jake Pope stuff on the show today. But yeah, Georgia brings in Jake Pope, perhaps another signal that the Buford curse, I should say, really is over and done with. Lang to Stank also says, here's the line of Bama coaches. You have DeBear, DeGoat, and DeBoer is about to be defired, which is very funny. Very funny, Lang. Very funny stuff. DMart42 says, I have the O-ring like the influencers do. Actually, around here, we got a bunch of light. Now, when we moved to our new studio, I've been told, like, this light is so bright. Y'all don't care about this, but it's so bright, it shows every blemish that I have. I've been told the new light is a little softer, so perhaps it's going to make me look a little bit more handsome on camera, which I'll always take. I will always take as an option. Frank Patterson says, who do you got the starting running back next year? You got to probably go Etienne, right? I mean, most likely to be Georgia's leading rusher. I guess I sort of think that. probably most likely to be the leading rusher there. I might go that way. They're also bringing the light down in the studio here right now. Let's go to Facebook for a moment, get a few comments over there, see what Georgia fans have on their mind on Facebook. We're going to bounce around every comment section. We're not going to go crazy long today. We just got 1,000 things going on. In all honesty, it probably works better with the bright lights on. But let's see what else folks got going on over here on Facebook just for a moment. John Paul Williams says, I think Saban learned from the real Bobby Bowden situation. That's why he retired when he did. Yeah, perhaps that's the case. Maybe that was the case that kind of seeing how that went. Look, I think that Alabama is not always the easiest job to have when you're not really playing at a national championship level. And Alabama now going on 3 years of kind of not being at a national championship level, at a certain point that becomes a little bit of a hard thing. So I think that's part of what it is that even for someone like Saban, the all-time GOAT status and the success that he enjoyed, that only provides him so much insulation at Alabama. I think that's probably the case. Laura Woodard says I look like a Jedi. Y'all know the end of Return of the Jedi when Anakin and Obi-Wan and who's the other one? Yoda. They're all sitting there looking at Luke Skywalker, and Luke kind of gives them that little nod. They're all over there like the glowing figures. Listen, I'll take that as a compliment any day of the week. William Camacho predicts that Trevor Etienne will be a huge factor in the running game. I like that. Barry Watkins also laughs about that. Daryl Fleming, everyone see a cruise, think BA's on it. Well, so BA is going to be on Icon of the Seas next week. So I'm looking forward to that. Excited about that. And we are going to do some pre-recorded shows to get ready for that. But that's not right now. For right now, I'm here, I am live, and we're having a great time. I am indeed. Joseph Kennedy says he even hates the song Patience. In other words, he has so little patience, he doesn't even like the song Patience. So I think Joseph speaks for a lot of Georgia fans when he says that. Barry Brown wondering if Alabama offered T-Rob a blank check. I'm sure money's part of this, but there's also, listen, we talk a lot about money when it comes to sports, but one of the things that's actually a huge factor in all of this is power. Is that what Alabama really can offer to Tavares Robinson is a degree of power that just doesn't exist at Georgia. T-Rob's a defensive coach, so you've got defensive-minded head coach, you've got defensive coordinator in place in Glenn Schumann, you've got a lot of institutional knowledge in place on the side of the ball defensively for Georgia. There's just only going to be so much of that to go around at UGA in comparison to Alabama, where T-Rob provides some SEC credibility, clearly defensive expertise, which Alabama needs. So some of what Alabama has perhaps offered could have been additional money, but a lot of what attracts these upwardly mobile men is also power, more control over your preferred side of the ball, and that's perhaps what Alabama truly had in offer more so than what Georgia does. But the latest chatter as of late, if you're following the online twists and turns of this, seems like Georgia may be an okay spot here. If Georgia can hold on to T-Rob, that would be a massive start of the Kalen DeBoer era. A big win for Georgia in the early days of DeBoer if it really does go down that way. Let's see what else. William Camacho says, I still look good for my age. I don't know if I take that as a compliment or not. First of all, I'm not that old. But thank you, William. I appreciate that. Thank you. Ryan Walker checks in to say, if we keep T-Rob and we get Caleb Downs, I'm guaranteeing you we'll have one of the best secondaries, just like the old school Raiders of the 1970s. I like that from Ryan Walker. And at a certain point, by the way, Kathy Aquaviva's laughing at what William said. But at a certain point, I'd love to have the conversation of here's what T-Rob means for Georgia. I think eventually we'll get there. At least it sounds like we will. But we got to weather that storm of sort of figuring out where all this is going to be able to do is there a possibility? Remember, clock is ticking 30 days from the day Saban left for 30 days from the day Saban left for these guys to enter the portal. If his position coach comes to UGA, would Would Caleb Downs perhaps think about coming to Georgia? It's at least worth pondering, and we will certainly get there. But I felt like it was more appropriate today to talk about this from the standpoint of, is he actually going to be coming before we kind of got into the what it means if he does. On Saturday, we did some of that, not knowing that there would be any chance we're going to spin back in this direction here. All right, over here on DawgNation.com for a minute. Scott Harris says, not ready to give Etienne the RB1 title yet. He says Florida has a soft program, and he's got to get up to speed with the way that Georgia plays ball. I think that's fair. One thing to keep in mind, though, is he's playing behind a much better offensive line here in Georgia than they would have had at Florida. I think that there are some that have probably overstated the value of Etienne's Georgia transfer. They've made him out to sort of be Barry Sanders or something like that. His numbers last year don't quite suggest that's the case, but I do think it's a good pickup for Georgia, and I do believe, given the fact that Branson Robinson's coming off injury, that Etienne's got more experience than the other guys in the room, Nate Frazier will still be a freshman. I think it probably stands to reason that Etienne is most likely to be the leading rusher, but certainly not a given. Randy Glass says, either way on T-Rob, Bama's feeling pretty anxious and defensive these days. I love it. Wish we could have beaten Saban on his way out, but it appears the tide is turning, pun intended. I like that, Randy, and I'll tell you this, and I don't mind saying this, is that obviously, as a Georgia fan, you would have loved to have gotten more wins against Saban. Who wouldn't have? Man, one of the things that is just so valuable is the fact that Georgia did get that win against Saban, and what was supposed to be the prime of his career, what was supposed to be a Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young and an all-time great pass rusher like Will Anderson, that was supposed to be a national championship team from Alabama, and instead Georgia took it from them. So while we would love to have had more wins for Kirby in the early days of his time as a coach in comparison to Nick Saban, that moment, I think, certainly validates the Kirby Smart era, cements it as what can be the rise of truly a historic time in college football, with Kirby kind of moving into that sort of, if Saban's the GOAT, greatest of all time, Kirby is certainly the got him maybe like the greatest of the moment, the greatest of the current era. And that win against Alabama in 2021 is a valuable commodity in that ongoing discussion. So CTC on the subject of those T-Rob rumors. Yeah, we're following all of that. Obviously, T-Rob was hired on Saturday. Reportedly, I believe it was Bama Online from On3. And if I don't have, I don't get into the, whatever game here. But the first place I saw this was Bama Online from On3. I believe they had this first. That T-Rob interviewed at Alabama on Sunday. And now there are, online conversations taking place across a multitude of websites that perhaps the pendulum is swinging back to T-Rob staying at Georgia. It's a very big deal. It's a very big deal. It's the kind of guy that you want. Obviously, Georgia is a pretty attractive offer, even in the light of Alabama kind of throwing the book, or not throwing the book at him, that's a different thing. Backing up the Brinks truck, that's the phrase that I'm saying here. Big money, a lot of control, a lot of power. Georgia's a chance to work with close friends and a chance to be a part of a program that's obviously well established, as opposed to an Alabama situation right now that's maybe for a guy like T-Rob a little bit more wait and see. I think you have to consider that as a real possibility. Johnny Rick says Etienne and Robinson could be lightning and thunder. I like that. Richard D is also kind of weighing in on that too. Brandon Griffin says that Saban is sticking around as a football CEO. Is this another Jerry Jones situation? Not good for a new coach coming in. A little bit weird, I would say. I mean, look, Kalen DeBoer, I don't believe, is coming to Alabama unless he had some reasonable expectation that he was going to get a chance to run the program his way. Of course, publicly, everybody says the right things. Oh, great respect for Nick Saban, and you love his input. But privately, these are men driven by ego, and they want the chance to run the program their way. So I don't believe DeBoer is taking the job and giving Alabama what it needed, which was a successful coach to introduce. I don't believe he's taking that job unless he had pretty reasonable assurance that he was going to get a chance to run the job the way that he wanted to. But obviously, it was certainly noticeable that Nick Saban was at the press conference the other day. Ultimately, I believe this is going to be, on Kalen DeBoer. And, Saban's not a fool. If there are some early struggles for DeBoer, instead of Saban swooping in to sort of share part of the blame for that, at that point in time, you better believe he'll step back and let the failure belong to DeBoer by himself. All right, let's do one more kind of trip around all the comment sections, and we'll get out of here for today, and obviously be watching the news pretty closely if something were to change here. Frank Patterson says that Nate Frazier did the Sonny Michel celebration after he scored in the All-American game. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Nate Frazier, and I know Frankie keeps up with these Georgia running backs as well as anybody, that's his favorite position. I think that Nate Frazier is as good a running back as Georgia has brought in from the high school ranks in quite some time, and I do have pretty high expectations for him next season, and his performance in the All-American Bowl where he had a touchdown is, I think, a pretty good example of that. D-Mart42 with the jazz hands. Yeah, you like that. Blake Robinson predicts that he calls him Karen Dubose. Then Caleb DeBoer says he's Brian Harsin 2.0. So Blake weighing in strongly on that. Frederick Meredith says between Brinson, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, Nazir Stackhouse, Christian Miller, Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod, Jamal Jarrett. He says the foundation of the defensive line is going to get set during the spring. And I think that Jordan Thomas is going to be really good too. So strong words from Frederick Meredith on that. DMart42 says Frazier looks like the most special and a total Kirby mentality guy at the running back spot. He looks elite. DMart, I enjoy that thought. Cal Cobb says, I doubt that Smart holds on to T-Rob after the Bama offer. So total realism, the chance to be full control, total defensive coordinator at Alabama is a pretty big deal. But there is also some advantage for Georgia here striking as quickly as it did. Alabama's scrambling around here. Kalen DeBoer's flying in. They're trying to find him some Alabama gear. Didn't you think it was weird that when DeBoer got off the plane the other day, he was wearing like generic sweatshirts, sort of looked like Rob Lowe at the Super Bowl, like just sort of generic clothes on, no crimson. I guess they don't sell that in Seattle, I guess. So DeBoer's trying to find some Alabama gear, trying to figure out where the bathrooms are, just trying to get his time started there at Alabama. And Georgia's striking quickly. And if you're T-Rob, who knows what level of commitment Georgia's made to him to be a part of the process. We know that Georgia defensively is a collaborative process, and T-Rob's good friends with a lot of the guys in the Georgia staff. While there's clearly value in having the Alabama job to yourself, there's also some value in working with friends and being a part of a successful organization and having respected input into that organization. That's perhaps some of what the promise is from Georgia. This is what the SEC is. It's just crazy all the time, and it just gets crazier. And we never seem to get to an off season. I love that. I enjoy that. I did joke on Saturday that I've declared some degree of news bankruptcy. I'm no longer capable of following the news that Jaden Maivia is coming to Georgia, then he's not. Kirby Smart's hiring T-Rob, now he's not, then he is again. This is the business we've chosen. This is a very, very wild thing. G. Gray says that Saban interviewed T-Rob. He says at the time, Saban didn't know if he would leave. You can't hire a defensive coordinator before the new coach gets there. So I have to admit, and G. Gray's going to hate this. I don't say this to troll him. But one of the things that was talked about at the end for Nick Saban was, oh man, this guy's so committed. He was still interviewing defensive coaches the day he announced he was retiring. Is that a good thing? I don't get that. Unless he told them he was retiring, but I'm interviewing you anyway. Something about that just seems really weird to me. That doesn't seem like the most forthcoming thing to do with the guys that you're hiring. But nonetheless, that's the story. Jerry Dogfan says it's 2024 and we're still living in the good old UGA glory days. I agree with that. DMart42 says good things folks aren't driving today. Is it snowing? DMart says it's snowing in College Station. I never know if y'all are joking or not. But there's a chance it's supposed to snow, I believe, though. Maybe I'll do this later on because we have a green screen. Maybe if it snows, I'll see if I can find a suit and tie somewhere, and we'll go green screen weather report. And I'll see if I can do some weather reports around DawgNation. We'll see if we can do that. That seems to be a pretty good business to be in. We'll see if we can get into that business here in a minute. All right, a couple more comments. We're going to get ready to go for today. Let's see what's happening over at Facebook one more time. So it sounds like we may still be having a little bit of sound issue, which is crazy. But we've worked very hard to try to prevent that. So, Lynn, I apologize for that. Mike Mazzell says it's snowing in Virginia, which is one of the reasons why I don't live in Virginia. Greg Baker says I got to buy a Polynesian pronunciation guide. No, Greg, I'm pretty good. Tunga Vailoa I always get right. Uiunglele, I always get that right. The Mayavia, I probably butchered that, but so part of when I think about like Jade Maeva or Maivia, maybe it is Maivia because it makes me think about The Rock's grandfather, the Rock Dwayne Johnson was the great High Chief Peter Maivia, so maybe it's Maivia. But my other Polynesian pronunciations are typically speaking pretty good. Jonathan Moore says it's not a sound issue, but a change in quality. Now, total honesty, y'all know we're having major issues. We're working to get those fixed. So we have changed the way we're kind of streaming these. The reason why we're pre-recording the regular show is to deliver it in normal quality. The reason why we're doing this way is we're trying to sidestep the thought of the crash. And we've used a few different platforms. We've had various issues with each one of them. All I can tell you is there's a lot of people working behind the scenes trying to make this as smooth as it can possibly be. Jonathan Moore says everything goes back to wrestling. Jonathan, you better believe that it absolutely does. And then finally, we'll go back to DawgNation.com for one more moment here. Rambo says, remember when someone's word of honor meant something. I totally get that point of view, Rambo, but I don't believe in this case that's the right thing. In other words, okay, Georgia moved in to get T-Rob, but y'all, Georgia has moved in and stolen coaches that just got jobs other places in the past. In other words, you can do the tisk-tisk thing against Alabama of how dare you come and take our coach that we just hired, but Georgia did that with Chidera Uzodiribe. Georgia did that with Trey Scott. Georgia's done that probably somebody else I'm not even thinking of. Georgia's done that type of thing in the past here. So I wouldn't view the wrestling match over T-Rob as an example of, T-Rob's word is not his bond. I think I would view this from the standpoint of, this is how attractive of a coach this is, how valuable of a coaching commodity this is, and how hard people are working, to get a coach of this quality. In other words, you still want T-Rob even if he interviewed at Alabama after he took your job. And if Georgia were to hold on to him, think about it. You basically beat Alabama twice if it ends up being true that you held on to him. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap it up for here right now. Y'all check out RS Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. No joke, it's about to be really, really cold this week. So stay safe with all of that, but also stay toasty and warm with our friends at RS Andrews. You can find them online, rsandrews.com. They'll get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. They'll take good care of you there on that. It may only cost you $99, so find out more online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door, Georgia. Maybe by then we'll know the end of the T-Rob saga, but for now, we're following all the twists and turns. We'll talk to you tomorrow, everybody.